stocked them on this little two-tier shelf in the sala, in the living room. And even though there was a lot of people living in the house that my grandfather raised me in, only one person in that entire house had to read all of those books. That one person was me. My grandfather made me read them out loud in English to him late at night after he would come home from work. My grandfather could understand English, he just chose not to speak it. I think he was a little embarrassed of his rather thick Spanish accent. So this is the way it worked in my house as a kid. I had to read these poems and short stories and novels out loud in English to him, and then he would critique me in Spanish. If you don't know what critique means, it means yell at you. If you've never been critiqued in Spanish, it hurts your soul, you know? Because he would get on to me, because sometimes I would just be going through the motions, like reading the poem like this, just to get to the end of the poem. And when I would, he would lean into me and say things like, Mio, if you don't bring it to life with your voice, how can I bring it to life with my mind? If you don't lean into the words, how can I lean into your voice? So he was also my first teacher, you know? I remember one time when I was younger than every single one of you, I was about 9 years old, I actually mustered the courage to challenge me, Abuelo, my grandfather. I looked him right in the eyes and I said, Abuelo! Why do you make me read all these stupid books? I'll never forget what he said to me. I remember it like it was yesterday. He said to me, Mijo, this barrio, this neighborhood is surrounded on all sides by gangs, poverty, crime, but when you're inside the poem, when you're inside the story, when you're inside the book, you are safe, and none of that can hurt you. And with those words, a spell was broken, and with those words, a life was saved, mine. And 7 years of teaching later, 4 books later, I find myself at the Hyde Park Literary Festival because of the fact that this beautiful brown man, who most people saw as a simple yard man, but was actually probably the most brilliant teacher I've ever had, saved me with books. So I want to honor my grandfather, who's really the reason that I'm here in front of all of you today, with a sort of a story poem to begin with. I have a new book that's at my publisher's right now. I'm so thrilled to have the new book at my publisher and away from me. So I'm going to read a couple of things from the new book. And by the way, these have never been read to an audience ever before. That's how new it is. Yes, we love the new ones, you know. So this is a little short story poem, and then I'll dive into like some big slam stuff. But this is from my grandfather, and this is called The Center Point Between the Two. My Theo once told me that Centerville, Texas gets its name by being the center point between Dallas and Houston, which seems like an incredibly insignificant fact to name one's town after, but Centerville has so much more meaning than that to me. I-45 is the interstate that links Dallas and Huntsville, Texas. That stretch of freeway is flat and long and unforgiving between the heat of the asphalt and the speed tracks scattered from Palmer to Conroe. There's a great deal on that stretch of highway for a viejito and his grandson to be weary of. My grandfather and I made the journey from the barrio of my youth to Huntsville twice a month for as long as I can remember. If you find yourself in Huntsville, Texas, you are likely one of 2 things: a student at Sam Houston State University, or an inmate in Huntsville State Penitentiary. We went to visit my Theo, my grandfather's son, and let's just say he was not a student. My Theo murdered his beautiful wife, Rosalinda. There is no poetic way to say this. In fact, there is no other way to say this. So we made the drive partly for him. Years later, I would realize it was partly for us as well. My grandfather drove a 1946 Dodge truck. Its color was somewhere between rust and primer gray. The truck had no AC, no heater, and no radio. My grandfather was one of those Latinos who thought if the posted speed limit was 60 miles per hour, it was a good idea to do 50 miles per hour. Picture that drive during the summers of my youth. 100-degree heat, no AC, no radio. To say the drive was long was to say Robert Johnson played guitar well. There are understatements, and then there is the drive to Huntsville in my grandfather's truck. My grandfather was a silent man, always thinking before speaking, and every action and every word, spoken or unspoken, there was thought behind it. So the drives from Dallas to Huntsville were not only long, they were usually quiet. The sound of asphalt rolling under our tires, the sound of the wind blowing past my outstretched hand. There wasn't much to see on this drive. The occasional junkyard, farms, flatland as far as the eye could see. But when you reach Centerville, Texas, for no reason at all, a pine forest sprouts up on both sides of the freeway and leans over you like giant green monoliths. It stretches for miles, and it was just then, when under the shade of those pine trees, that my grandfather would start to sing. He would sing corridos, these ancient Spanish folk songs about men who lived epic lives, men like Pancho Villa, Miguel Hidalgo, Joaquin Morienta. He would sing softly under his breath, perhaps thinking that the roar of the freeway under us would mask his voice, but I would lean over toward him just an inch or two so as not to arouse suspicion, but close enough to listen to his beautiful ancient voice, deep and dark as well water. I'll never forget that voice. If you ask me today, I cannot tell you the color of the mortar that formed the walls of that prison rising up from the earth. I could not tell you how many armed guards were stationed in each tower as we exited the freeway and turned into the prison grounds. I could not retrace the path from the sign-in desk to the visitors area for you like some cartography child prodigy, but I can tell you everything about my grandfather's voice, those songs he would sing, and those pine trees leaning over us, surely to listen in as well. Don't you see? This is what my grandfather did for me. This was his magic. He took what should have been the ugliest moments of my childhood, and through his voice, he transformed them into something beautiful, and no greater magic can exist. My grandfather lived and raised me in the barrio that fell under the shadows of downtown Dallas. My tío lived in a prison made of colorless walls and barbed wire. Somewhere between the two was a pine forest that leaned in to hear the stories and songs of passers-by. My childhood was made up of so much ugliness and so much beauty, and I was the center point between the two. Thank you for listening to that one.